Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I know I said in my last video that I was hoping to be able to post more regularly, and that is still a goal. It's just that as soon as I posted that last video, my children came home with all the last end of the school year germs, and that took me out of commission for recording videos for a week and a half. But I'm back and I'm excited to do this tag. This is a tag that I have done every year since I started on BookTube, and I think it's just a fun way to check in at the midpoint of the year, see what you thought about your reflect on those earlier reads of the year, and then think about some of the things that are going to be important over the rest of the year. So there's a bunch of questions and I am going to get right in. So the very first one is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2023? And this is an interesting question. And I think, at least for me, it is a question that is not necessarily indicative of what is going to be my favorite book at the end of the year. Because I am definitely a person who succumbs to recency bias. When I find something new that I really, really like, it kind of takes over for a little while. If I love the characters, a story, a show, it is all I can think about for a period of, days to weeks to months, depending on how much I like it. And so sometimes I get really caught up in the last thing that I read, and it can take some time to see if that is going to solidify into an all-time favorite, a long-time favorite, or if it's just something that I kind of get swept up in the moment, and then it kind of fades away. And I think this is why I am a person, sometimes you get those questions in tags like this that, talk about if the ending of a book can make a book for you. And that definitely happens to me. I get caught up in a really explosive ending and end up believing that I liked a book more than I actually did because I'm just so hyped up by that amazing ending. So it's definitely easy to hook me in that way. But things do settle. And after a period of a couple months, I can generally tell, is this a book that is going to stick with me? Am I still thinking about it? Or is it something that I really enjoyed in the moment, but doesn't have that longevity? So I am aware that the selections on this tag are going to be colored with that little bit of recency bias, but it'll be interesting to see if these are still amongst my top reads by the time we get to the end of the year. And my two selections for this question were Project Hail Mary and Gideon the Ninth. Project Hail Mary is a book that I read last month, and I believe it is the best audiobook that I have ever listened to. I absolutely loved listening to this. I thought Project Hail Mary was a great story on its own. It's kind of a dual narrative where you're following a character in the present time, and then you are also reflecting back on his life and kind of building up the answer to the question of how he got to this point that you're in the present, because it's a bit of a mystery in how he got to where he is. And the unfolding of that mystery is really cool. The things that are happening in the present timeline are really cool. And I honestly think that the audiobook just elevates the entire experience. I imagine this is a book that I would still like if I read it physically, but there were certain parts, especially certain kinds of dialogue, that worked so well on audio. And I'm not sure if they would translate exactly the same if I read it kind of in print, but regardless, fantastic book. If you like audiobooks, definitely listen to it as an audiobook, but just check it out in general. If you weren't amongst, the 99% of readers who read it a couple of years ago when it came out. But I was slow to come in, but I have joined the ranks of everybody who loved this book so much the year that it was released. And then the other selection that I had made for this was Gideon the Ninth. And that is a book that I read this month, and I haven't talked about it because I haven't done a wrap up yet. And I'm actually hoping to film a review for this book because I do have a lot of thoughts about it. But I will just say that I really loved it. I loved the setup. I loved the characters. I loved the way that everything played out, and it made me super excited for the second volume in this series. So I won't say a lot beyond that, but Gideon the Ninth, definitely a book that worked for me. And then the next question, so number 2, is what is the best sequel that you've read so far in 2023? And this allowed me to cheat a little bit on question 1 because there was a third book that I also really, really loved this year, but it's a sequel, so I got to use it for the second question. And that is The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. This was the final book in the Age of Madness trilogy, the final book in the First Law series, and it was phenomenal. I think in general, the Age of Madness trilogy is just Joe Abercrombie at his best, and after completing the First Law series, I can say with full confidence that I think that Joe Abercrombie is the funniest modern fantasy author. He writes his books so well, even if you are not a fan of the First Law, because I think there are certain elements of the narrative, the way the books are set up, that might not be for everyone, but I do not understand how anyone could read them and not find them funny. They're so darkly funny. And I'm not even a big grimdark fan. I think part of it is just because that really nihilistic worldview does not line up with the kind of person that I am, the kind of, like, the way that my brain works, the way that I think about the world and our place in it. It just doesn't align in the same way. So sometimes, to me, even when a book is not doing this and when it wouldn't do this for anyone else, I feel like the grimdark can come off as a little bit edgy and a little bit over the top. And what happens with Joe Abercrombie is that humor comes in and balances it so well that I don't ever feel that way. I feel like he has attained the perfect balance in a dark novel, and finishing this series made me really sad, number one, and made me super excited for whatever he is going to come up with next. Number 3 is a new release from this year that you haven't read yet, but you want to get to. For me, this is the Encyclopedia of Fairies. And this is a book that I didn't even have on my radar. This is not one that was on my most anticipated list of 2023 or anything like that. It's a book that I only heard of once it came out this year. And a lot of people have really enjoyed it, and I think that it's going to be something that I am also going to enjoy. So I picked it up at the bookstore last month. I am hoping that I'm going to be able to read it this summer, like either next month in July or in August. And I think it's just like a cozy fantasy romance, so a little bit outside of the typical fantasy that I read, but something that I think would make a really fun, light, page-turning novel for summer. Question number 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? And this one, my answer is kind of 2 in 1, because this is kind of a book that's coming out later this year and kind of a book that's already out. And that is Philip Chase's Edan series. So this is a book series that I have really been wanting to get to, and all 3 books in the trilogy are coming out this year. Books 1 and 2 are already out, and book 3 is going to come out a little bit later this year, and I really want to get to it. I had been initially I was hoping that I could read them all on release day, but just the timing of the first one ended up being at a time when I had a lot of personal things that were happening, and I just did not get around to doing it. So I think now I'm hopefully going to read them all just in a row. I'm just going to get them and read through them all, because number 1, I want to support Philip, but number 2, I also feel like Philip's style is going to be something that really appeals to me. So this is definitely an anticipated series for me. Question number 5 was one of the harder ones to answer. I actually had to go back to my book journal for this one and look for a book, because usually they'll just pop up and I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely the answer to this one, because the books are sticking out for various reasons. But number 5 was, what is your biggest disappointment of the year? And initially I thought, I don't really have a disappointing book, and I couldn't remember picking something up with big expectations and then it letting me down, or feeling like I had a really bad time reading something. But when I did go back through my book journal, excuse me, I did see that back in January, I did read a book, unfortunately, that did not live up to my expectations. And that was Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, which is really sad because it was part of a TBR that Alan had picked out for me. And I loved all the other books that he got me to read. There were a bunch of 5-star reads, things that I really ended up enjoying. But Senlin Ascends, unfortunately, was a miss for me. And it's very frustrating because I feel like the disappointment is layered in this one, because before I picked up Senlin Ascends, I thought that it was going to be genre blendy and strange, bizarre, with excellent writing, fascinating characters, a really unique premise. And it was all of those things. If you take the parts, each of the things that come together to make Senlin Ascends, all of those things are true. And they're all things that I love. They're all my favorite things. When I find a new favorite fantasy book, it has all of those things. And so I do not understand why Senlin Ascends did not work for me, and it was very frustrating, but it felt like a slog when I was reading it. It felt like it was 10 times longer than it actually was, and I just was not having fun. I was not having a good time when I read it, and for that reason, Even though I only gave the book 2 stars, I am going to continue on with the rest of the series because I'm hoping that maybe it was just me, it was not the right time, and that the rest of the series is going to pull me in. I did like some of the female characters that popped up, and I think that they play a bigger role in the subsequent books, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on the Books of Babel and hope that the rest of the series is really going to do it for me. After that, we had number 6 is your biggest surprise of 2023 so far. And I've got 2 books for this one as well. So my biggest brand new surprise is that this year I picked up the book, The Phantom Tollbooth. So this is just one of those classic works of fantasy that I had never read before. And I was actually doing a painting. So I was doing a paint by numbers and I needed an audiobook to listen to. So I just went to my library and chose the selections, filtered it out by ones that were available immediately and saw that The Phantom Tollbooth was available. And so I picked it up and I loved it. It was so fun. It was delightful, quirky. There was a lot of wordplay, puns. It kind of reminded me of Alice in Wonderland, that kind of bizarre, whimsical type of story. I liked it so much that I listened to it all really quickly. It's a short book, and a short audiobook, but I listened to it really quickly and then passed it on to Juliet, who also listened to it very quickly and also loved it. So if you have not read The Phantom Tollbooth, if you've been putting it off or it's just one of those classics that you've never gotten to, I think that is really worth reading. It is delightful. It was really, really fun. And if you have a family road trip or somewhere where you have to listen to an audiobook with your kids coming up, it's a phenomenal selection. The audiobook is really good, and I think that it does a good job of keeping them engaged. It certainly did so for Juliet. The other book that was a big surprise for me was a continuation of a series. So I read last year and also the year before last, I read this book twice now. I read Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, which was the beginning of a new series for her. And it was a complete surprise the year that I read it. It blew me out of the water. I thought it was really fresh, really unique, a great fantasy novel, great beginning to a series. And so I was super excited for the next book to come out. And then when the second book, Fevered Star, came out, I wasn't able to get to it right away. And a bunch of people who had really liked book 1 started reading book 2 and not liking it. And then I was scared to read it because I had enjoyed book 1 so much that I didn't want to dislike book 2. And it seemed like that's what was happening to everyone. And so I put it off and put it off and put it off. And finally this year I was like, no, I have to read it. I have to just do it and see what it's like. And I actually really ended up enjoying it. It was a 4-star read for me, which it was solid. I thought, it did feel a little like a middle book. There was a lot of setup for what is clearly going to come in the next volume. I'm actually not sure this is a trilogy, but it did feel like a middle book regardless. A lot of setup, but I still liked it. I liked the direction that it took. It was not as unique or as fun as the first one. I still think that I vastly prefer Black Sun to Fevered Star, but I think it's because my expectations have been lowered so much that when I did read it, it was a really pleasant surprise, and I was happy to say that I really enjoyed it. Question number 7 is, who is your favorite new author that you discovered this year? And this one was difficult because I've read books by people that I have read from before, or there's been a few new people that I've read a single book from, and I wasn't sure if I could really say that was a new favorite for me. But again, I kind of have a 2-part answer for this one. So for an author that I have read from before, but I have been able to read more from this year and am really starting to like them, is Adrian Tchaikovsky. Prior to this year, I had only ever I'd read 2 things, actually. I had read Children of Time, which was excellent, and then Elder Race, which was a novella, which I thought was good. It was not great. It was not terrible. It was good. But this year, I have been able to read 3 more things, I believe, by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I read a novella called Ogres, which I loved. A book called Dogs of War, which was also really good, really fun. That was a pretty good surprise as well. And then I read another sci-fi novel. What was that one called? Doors of Eden, maybe? But it was like a multi-universe sci-fi novel. But regardless, I had read Guns of the Dawn as well before. So I have now read pretty widely in Adrian Tchaikovsky, a bunch of different genres, a bunch of different formats of books. And I really like his stuff. And the more that I read from him, the more I appreciate him as an author, because I really appreciate how wide his bibliography is, how versatile he is. He writes in a variety of styles, a bunch of different types of characters, genres, and he does it all really well. Like, you could pick up a book by Adrian Tchaikovsky and hate it, and I would still encourage you to read another book because it is so vastly different. I think that he just has a lot to offer, and there's likely something that will appeal to you because he has just written so much. So he is fast becoming a favorite author, and an author that I trust to give me something really unexpected. But I did not read him for the first time this year, so I'm not sure that that counts for the answer. So I'm also going to say that I really expect that KJ Parker could become a favorite author for me. I've only read one book by him. It was, again, a book that was that Alan told me to read, and that was The Folding Knife, which is a standalone fantasy novel, and it was excellent. And the reason why I think it could make him a favorite author for me is just because it was not the content. Like, this was not a story where it was just like an exciting plot, and that's why I thought that the book was really good. This was an example of reading something that was so well crafted in terms of execution, writing style, characterization, just the scope of the story and the things that he chose to focus on, and how he brought things that are, I think, objectively a little dull, how he made them so fascinating and made me want to read more and more. I just think that someone who is able to do that is someone that could very quickly become a favorite author of mine. So I certainly could not say that KJ Parker is a favorite author after having read one singular book by him, but certainly reading The Folding Knife made me optimistic that KJ Parker could become a favorite author in the future. The next question number 8, is newest fictional crush. And I have never answered this question before because everybody who does this is like, what a silly question. But this year, I have an answer. And that answer is Gideon from Gideon the Ninth. She is an amazing character. And I thought in the beginning, because Gideon is definitely a character, it's a character who felt like very J. Kristoff to me in the beginning. Meaning that, like, there was a lot of, like, over-the-top dialogue, like a lot of posturing. Just like when I think of that kind of, like, stereotypical edgy fantasy hero, that is what Gideon appeared to be in the beginning of the book. But I personally think that there was a lot of depth to her character, that she surprised me in really subtle, nuanced ways. I just thought that she was so cool. Like, so cool. I think that even I have other characters who are definitely like favorite fantasy characters of all time, but if there was ever a good answer to this silly fictional crush question, then the answer for me this year is Gideon, because I loved her. Question number 9 is, who is your newest favorite character? And this has to be Lady Trent from the Natural History of Dragons series, or the Memoirs of Lady Trent. I am loving this series. I am a little over halfway through, so I think there's 5 books in total, and I have read 3 of them. And number 1, I'm loving this series. It is like the warm hug of my year. I am so happy whenever I listen to one of these books. And I just love Lady Trent as a heroine, as a character. She is phenomenal. She is a naturalist and is reflecting back on her life as a scientist and the discoveries that she made and how difficult it was for her to kind of break into that avenue and to prove herself and prove her worth. And she's witty and funny and smart, and I'm smiling right now because it makes me so happy to talk about this series. And she is definitely a new all-time favorite fantasy character. Just like persnickety old women who are reflecting back on their accomplishments, it is a trope that always gets me. I love it. There's a character like that in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. Also really enjoyed that character, and it's just something that, like, it's just so fun. There's just a fun perspective to read from, and I am really, really loving Lady Trent. So definitely my answer for that one. A book that made me cry. So I find this question hard to answer because there's lots of books that have made me cry this year, but those, like, the tears are usually from character deaths. And so when I say, like, this book made me cry and it's an epic fantasy and not something that's intended to be sad, then I feel like it kind of gives it away that someone must die, because that's the sad event that happens. So I usually try to pick a book that made me cry or made me really emotional for non-death related reasons. And the book that I decided to go with for this question was Stoner. And I can't actually remember if Stoner made me cry, but it is a book that I, at one point, had to shut and put down, and I'm saying shut even though I read it on my Kindle, so like it was definitely like a dramatic like button push instead of like a very satisfying shutting of pages, but for effect we'll pretend that I shut it. But I had to put it down and just like stare at the wall because it was so bleak and so depressing. The writing in this book was phenomenal. It was an excellent book. I don't think I would ever reread it because it just like opens an existential hole in your chest that you can't fill, and it will sit with you for days and weeks afterward. And it's just like, in terms, like I said, I don't know if actual tears came out as I was reading it, but Stoner is definitely the book that made me the saddest so far this year. After that is a book that made you happy, and I just talked about this and was like smiling, giggling the whole time, and that is A Natural History of Dragons. That whole series, I'll pick the first one because, you know, that was the one that started it all, but I, like I said, just feel so happy whenever I read one of them. I am so looking forward to continuing on with the series. It's just been the best. I am thankful for Angela because it was her video about the series that really made me feel like I wanted to read it. And I was like, this sounds like something I'm really gonna like. And I have. It has been so good. I am enjoying it so much, and I'm just really thankful that I decided to read it this year. Number 12 is, what is the most beautiful book you have purchased this year? And I'm happy to say that I have not purchased a lot of books this year. I have been trying really hard, not for any book ban reasons or anything like that. It's mostly just that I own so many books that I have not read, and I really want to read them. They're not down here. Like, I always say this, and then I'm surrounded by books that I have read. I keep my unread books up in my room, and it's just overflowing. Like, my whole TBR bookshelf is full. There are stacks on the floor. I need to get through them. I want to read the books that I already own, so I've been trying really hard not to buy too many books. But I did, when I came back from vacation, go on like a little bit of a spree and spent a bunch of the like points that I had accumulated at the bookstore. So I did buy a bunch of books, and one of them was really pretty. It is an omnibus of Guy Gavriel Kay's Finnevar trilogy, and it's beautiful. It's like pastel-y, like pink and purple. I'll put a picture up anyway. It's got a dragon on it. I just think that it's a really pretty book. It's not one of the special editions, like any of those beautiful volumes that come out every year. Like, I'm sure there are gorgeous books that have been released this year, but in terms of ones that I have purchased, that one's really pretty, and it's making me excited to read it. I do really want to pick it up because it is a gorgeous copy of that trilogy. And then the very last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I'm only putting one book on this because it is the book that I need to read, and that is Ship of Destiny. Ship of Destiny, Ship of Destiny. I need to finish the Live Ship Trader series. I have only read one of these per year. Last year I read Mad Ship. The year before that I read Ship of Magic right at the end of the year. And I love this trilogy, possibly even more than Farseer. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I honestly think, and this is going to sound like the silliest thing ever, but I honestly think that the really tightly bound UK paperbacks have a lot to do with it, because they're so hard for me to open and read, which sounds ridiculous because these books are great, and I really should just like get it from the library on my Kindle or something and just read it that way and like just use my copy for the bookshelf. But whatever the reason is, like whether it's just some sort of like weird masochism that I'm going through, or I have no idea what is happening, why I'm preventing myself from reading this, but it is going to happen. I'm going to finish this book by the end of the year. It must happen, and I am excited for it. And then I can get the next trilogy and start this process all over again, but we won't go there yet. I just have to do it. I have to read Ship of Destiny, and I am going to make it happen. But that's it. That is the tag. Like I said, it's really fun to reflect on these. If you would like to answer any of these questions, give me your answers for any of these questions, please feel free to do so. And I will see you, barring any disaster that prevents me from recording, with another video soon. Bye.